Well, hello everyone, and welcome to part 2, which would be hanging the inside unit. And there are some things that might be an issue with hanging inside unit. It's fairly straightforward, but we'll go over what happened in this particular case. Let's get started. Well, now we got that down, there are some best practices and some things that you might want to avoid, some things that might not work out exactly correctly. So let's talk about the installation first. Well, I have a picture over here to the left which comes from their My Drive. This is in fact their installation manual, a page from it, page 1.4. And although I didn't carry it in the first part, when I was talking about the correct dimensions, they do give you the correct dimension for, you don't want to get it too close up against a wall and you don't want to get it too close up against a ceiling or other barriers. And so they give you the dimensions for this. Now, if you go to the minimums, kind of like what I did, you can end up with a bend radius issue at the bottom. And if you'll notice, the line does seem to come straight into the unit. And the reason for that is we don't want to have the oils migrate out of the condensing unit on low flow. And in this case, I'm going to have a fairly low flow of refrigerant most of the time, and so it could be a real issue. So in my case, I have a little P-trap down here which will catch the oils as they migrate. They'll fall back down through the unit at a pretty decent angle, and they'll all collect at this point. At the time the unit comes on, it should recirculate them back in. I had an old ASHRAE standard back in the day when I was doing blast chillers, designing blast chillers and installation of blast chillers, which had a very wide flow of mass flow, gas at any given time. So when they first would come on, they'd have a tremendous amount of mass flow, and then at the point when it was very small, we'd have trouble getting the gases to return the oils, and they would migrate out. Now, this is showing the preferred method. It's giving you a visual, although I didn't see necessarily any installation that says particularly avoid that. You certainly don't want some huge, big circle, big loop around, because that creates a very, very large volume of oil that if it got out, by the time it blew a little bit through, makes the air passage or the gas passage through the pipe, it may not actually be very effective to getting the oil returned. So I do have a dip when you see that. When we see the installation, the full installation, you'll notice there is a little bit of a dip here. Part of that is also for bend radiuses, because I did keep it tucked under at the minimum, pretty well much at these two minimum dimensions, having free air on each side. Now the upper unit, which is what we're going to talk about today, this particular model can be mounted right, left, or center. Now, if you go to the center mount, the distance above is a little bit less, or can be a little bit less, than if you put it to the sides, which makes sense. If you had a wall here or a wall here, we'd want to pull this down just a little bit to allow better airflow around so that it's not short-circuiting itself here at this point. So let's go on to the next one. Here we have the next one. And it shows the back plane, which is what we're going to talk about, and it talks about taking these little corner pieces off, which I have a picture to show you in just a second. Now here's an enlarged version of page 2.4 of the installation manual, and it's telling you what we were talking about. If you have a wall here and you're left mounted, you need to keep it off. I'd call it 5 inches off the wall. I'd put it a little bit extra just in case I mismeasured or something. It's better to have a gracious plenty than a desperate little, and it's a little more on the right side, because of course the panel that holds the unit up is actually smaller than the back of the panel, and so we're actually got a little bit more room out here on the edge. In fact, it comes real close to that hole right there. Ceiling is the same way. It says if you're in the center, you can go 3 to 8. I'd go at least 3.5, if not 4 inches, just to make sure. I have plenty of room on top, but I don't want it to be too terrible low, because at that case it might affect where the air discharge is coming out and how it distributes in the room. Now, if you're to the right or the left, you see they increase that dimension a little bit, and it makes sense. Again, if you're going to be jammed up against a wall, you want this down a little bit so that the air can get back to it around, because this is really getting choked off at this side. Same thing on the other side. Now, the diameter of the circle, which I'll talk about here in just a second, says a 3-inch hole located off of the line, and on the back of this panel, there are embossed measurements, and like here's a line, and here's these are for studs. These are also for studs. This is pretty well much generated to be put on a stud and on a stud here, which will put this hole out in the middle of nowhere, you know, in between studs. So you can also take this section out if you want to take the lines and bend them to the middle, or if you want to take them to the end, they'll come out. Those little plastic knockouts can come out of it and allow you to run against the wall sideways. You can also pull it out the bottom on either end. You can take this out to the right or to the left. Most people, I think, would just find that hole that they indicate is probably the most common right there where it's indicated, and it's measured off of the plane. So you don't really want to go too far into drilling that hole till you've at least got this thing dry mounted. Now you see this right here, it says 3-inch. Again, 3-inch diameter is a big hole, and it shows it going downhill. Now what is that for? Well, it's for the same reason I mentioned on the first part there. It's to guarantee that all the oils, if they come out, they want to return back to the unit. And it would be better not to have a trap at the bottom if you can avoid it. Certainly do not have a huge loop. That's a problem with some of the DIY units out there. They come with the lines pre-charged, and so what you end up with is, in often cases, the lines come in preset lengths, and so you can't trim them to your particular need, and you can end up with a huge problem and cut down the life of the unit. Let's look at the next slide. If you like this content, please go to calldeltosell.com, find the tab that says on YouTube, click it, and it'll open up a page of QR codes. There you can use a smartphone to scan and get to the YouTube page, or you can just mouse over and click it on a PC. There you'll be able to subscribe to this little button over here and click the notification bell so that YouTube will notify you. Thank you. Here's a picture of the ends that I talked to you about. You can knock these ends out if you want to bring the line out this way, and of course it's made about the sizes of pretty standard type of line set covers, and you can come out either the top or the bottom. You have room here to do that, and of course you can pull it out the back through that long slot. I'm assuming, I haven't done that, but I'm assuming that's again what they're for. Let's look at the next slide. At this stage, I'm just locating my studs, and you see these little points? Well, they're just trimmed off of a piece of blue tape. This represents the center of the room dimensionally from left to right, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere, and here are 3 studs. So my center of my room really doesn't line out well to put like the unit in between 2 studs like it's pretty well much designed, which means I have a little bit more effort I'm going to have to give to it. I happen to have a little sanding block. It's nothing more than the end of a 2x4. I've painted a little bit white, so if I'm doing something, some kind of construction, I don't want to accidentally throw away my nice little 2x, my little stud, because it's about the right size for a piece of sandpaper. And it happens that pretty common dimension of tape here is pretty well much the same dimension, I don't know if I get this lined up, as the stud. So you can take a little piece of blue tape, trim it to a point like you saw in the picture, and it will help you identify the studs. Now we take a typical stud finder. It's disappearing on me. There we go. It's yellow. There we go, down at the bottom. So this thing is a ghost stud finder, very hard to find. See, it's a ghost. Ooh, ghost. Anyway, with a stud finder, you're able to then locate the studs, put your little blue tape, not marking on the wall, got a little point to it, and you've got it pretty well down pat. In fact, at the very top of your stud finder is your little notch. So you can do a stud finder upside down, find your spot, and then put your blue tape where you want it to be, which gives us that picture. And again, that picture is just designed to locate center of the wall, because I haven't drilled any holes yet. I haven't laid the plate up there, so I don't really know what I'm getting into or where my hole is going to fall, but this is what I've done at this stage. In this picture, what I've got going on are my holes. I've located my holes where I think I'm going to use, trying to use as many that are already existing in the back panel as possible, and I've located my hole. Take my little snap toggles. I'll show you what they are if you're not familiar with them. All right, if you're not familiar with them, they are a product. Okay, it's a ghost toggle at that. But what it is it's a little device that as you slide it in, these hold very well, and I'll tell you why. Okay. You've seen toggles, a toggle will flip around on you. Well, what makes these unique is, let me get it to the center of the screen, is you can pull the little ends, the little tabs at the end, and make it flatten down. So you drill a 1/2-inch hole, put it through the hole, pull it all the way up, and see how that piece is flat? So it holds a lot of weight. It's not just catching on the corners like a spring toggle would be, where it's catching here and say on the other one that's pointed down. They're laying flat, so they hold up really well. And then you slide this little piece in there to keep it in place, and you break off the little helpers. Works pretty well. They'll hold quite a bit of weight. I don't remember if it says on the box how much they'll hold, but they'll certainly hold more than that whole thing carries on it. It says, right there it is, holds up to 238 pounds. So they're very strong, they're clean to put in, and they stay in place. So if you did have a hollow wall with a back in it, if you have to take the screw out, the piece won't fall down. So they're pretty nice as far as that goes. That's what I use to locate here. And here's where I had a little bit of an issue. If we were to go back to that original diagram, it says 3-inch hole, which is a pretty darn big hole. And as you can get an idea looking right across the bottom of this particular unit, 3-inch hole is just about where that line is. In fact, when I drilled the hole, I did not pilot drill it. It's just sheetrock, so I didn't think I'd be off that much, but I was drilling with the drill over my head, and when I did, it came down just a little bit, a few little swipes before the drill bit bit in, and the hole was a little bit low, and so I had to then go back to my back panel and slot my holes a little bit in the up direction so that the plate could come down to cover that edge when I put the unit on. And remember, you can hang the unit before you bend the pipe out. So you can see how it fits if you just do that. You can go ahead and put it up there and check your dimension to make sure you cover it. Now these tabs here are fairly small, they're fairly narrow, and I wanted to get, the recommendation clearly is if you put it up in here, in these areas, you're going to have pretty good support. But I wanted one at each of the tabs to hold it nice and secure against the wall. And then down here we have the two little snaps. Wanted to make sure they were tight against the wall as well, just to make sure that the plate didn't want to pull away as I was, unsnapping the unit. So that's up to you how you want to do that. And of course, it gives you the instructions on this side, what to do, tells you how to drill it, tells you where to drill it, that type of thing. Let's look at the next picture. Well, here I have it on the wall, and this is where I thought I wanted it perfectly. And as I got that hole, I don't know if you can see, it's either fixed or not. Either I've slotted this or I've not, but it's right where it's supposed to be now, a little bit high. And what I've ended up having to do is take about 2 hours out of my day, because I had to slot these screw holes wherever they are. There's one straight through the metal on a stud. But I had to take each one of those holes and open it up a little bit, and then of course paint it, because I don't want it to rust and have a little bit of, in the future, if it sweats a little bit, having little drips of rust coming down my wall. So it just took a bit of time to, after I opened up those slots just enough to bring that down to cover that raw edge, we were in good shape, but I needed to paint those just to make sure they didn't rust, if that makes sense. Now, I mentioned 3 inches because that's what the instructions said to use, and that's the size of hole I made. And I happen to notice the line set when it comes in, I've got a much smaller diameter thimble. Okay, now this thimble doesn't really angle, so I don't know how practical that would be, but it's just intended to go through a wall where you're punching through the other side so that your line set and your wires can't fall down. It's also about 2 1/4 inches in diameter versus the 3 the Mitsubishi instruction manual said to use. And had I used something small like that, a little smaller hole saw, and I almost did, but I followed the instructions. And by doing that, I got in a little bit of dimensional issue with that hole. It really doesn't need to be that big, and we'll see that when we go into part 3, which is the hookup of the unit. Now in this photo, I show it actually installed against the wall. And here's just drilled into just screwed in through the plate into the stud. And then you can see the size of these little tabs. They're not very wide. This one is very well placed at this point, because there's no way that one is going to bend off the wall. And if it does, you can tap it back. But you can also see the instructions, the dimensions. The center line of unit is here, and it has these little marks kind of giving you a hint of where to do it. You put your level right across here. If you had a long level, you could put it across this tab and the one that's just off screen on this side. Now this is a photograph. It's rotated 90 degrees because you can see the floor system and the receptacle here. But what we see here is the width of these little catches where those tabs go in, and they do allow a little bit of left and right final adjustment if you had a smaller hole come right through here. And remember, this line set isn't very big. There, the line set. This, I guess, would be the drain. No, I reversed that. I think this is the copper and this is the drain. But either which way, it's just not that big. You do have plenty of room. But if you'll look at that edge right here, that 3-inch hole is right tucked in that corner, and it just doesn't allow for much drift on your hole saw when you're cutting it. And that's what she looks on the wall. Again, remember, if we were to shove it over in this corner, we'd have to bring it down, and if we pull it over in this corner, we'd bring it down, because we want to give the necessary air space to come in, tuck in the top of the unit. And from this side, when it's in the center, you have air being able to make it into the intake here from all around the unit along the ceiling. So that's pretty well much it. It's not that hard. They're not that heavy. It is possible to make a mistake. Like I said, I followed the instructions and had the hole wander off just enough to be seen when I had the unit snapped on there. And that cost me a couple hours worth of delay because I needed to then slot the plate holes up just a little bit from their existing condition so that it would drop down enough to cover that bottom edge. And then, of course, paint them to make sure they didn't rust in the future. I could have also used a little bit smaller hole, and I think I'd have been just fine. So I hope you got some kind of value out of this that's not being produced by other videos out there online. And if you want to, hang around for the third part where we interconnect the unit. And we appreciate you.